Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, there are those that say that so long as Jeremy Corbyn remains leader, Labour isn't very likely to win the next election, and maybe not the one after that either. True or not, things certainly won't be made any easier under new plans to update the boundaries of constituencies in England and Wales. They are meant to standardise, as far as possible, the size of those constituencies which have, the plan's architects say, favoured Labour for the past few years. As it happens, Mr Corbyn is one of the 50 MPs or so from all parties who could lose their seats.
The 650 ladies and gentlemen who make up the House of Commons between them represent the 64 million people who live in the UK. But if you want fewer politicians, they have to have bigger constituencies with more voters. And that is what today's changes are all about. Take the famous steelworks at Port Talbot in Wales, currently in the same Aberavon constituency as the town, but not under today's plans. There would be an MP on one side of this river and a different MP on the other, splitting the high street from the town's shopping centre.
I don't think splitting things up makes things better.
We wouldn't have anybody directly to go to, yes.
Does that worry you?
Yes, it does, yes.
But the bigger picture is how all these new lines on a map could affect the outcome of the next election, because more Labour seats are disappearing than Conservative ones.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that this is all about a Conservative Party advantage. The situation is being gerrymandered to help the Conservative Party. And I think that's an appalling situation, and it's terrible for democracy in our country.
Overall, the number of Westminster MPs will fall from 650 to 600, with new constituencies drawn up to contain an average of 75,000 voters. Politicians whose constituencies are at risk include former Chancellor George Osborne, his Tatton seat could disappear, Brexit Secretary David Davis, who's facing changes in Houghton, Price and Howden, and even Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. His seat in North London is being merged with the one next door.
Currently, we have seats which are 3 times the size of another, which means that one elector's vote is worth 3 times that of another. That's simply not fair, which is why we're determined to ensure that we have equal-sized constituencies.
So why do these equal-sized constituencies favour the Tories? In its most basic form, Labour towns like Pontypridd in Wales now have fewer voters, so these areas will have fewer MPs, while suburbs in the southeast, this is Horsham, have more voters, so this constituency hasn't been cut.
Population movement tends to be out of Labour favouring city and urban areas, more to the countryside and to suburban areas where the Conservatives dominate. And therefore, almost whenever these boundary reviews take place, and we've had half a dozen over the years since the Second World War, it favours the Conservative Party.
So expect an almighty row, and not just from Labour.
And Chris is still in Westminster tonight, where he lives. Not quite, but nearly. Chris, is Theresa May going to get these through? I mean, obviously it benefits the Tory party, but individual MPs could lose out. So will she get it through, you know, the Commons itself?
Well, Tom, what I will say is this. Labour MPs have got a lot more to cry about for reasons that we've just been explaining, but this is not a pain-free process for many Conservative MPs as well. And as I think Theresa May is probably learning quite fast on the job at the moment, she has a very small majority in that place behind me. So it would only take around a dozen Tory MPs, those who like their constituency boundary and don't want it changed, or those who aren't happy with their consolation prize of going up to the House of Lords for standing aside, and they could block this thing in its tracks. The thing is, Tom, if you're changing all these boundaries to have roughly 75,000 voters in each one, and you're cutting the number of MPs in that place to 600, it's going to be a painful process, particularly for Labour, but also for the Tories.
OK, but talking about Labour, it's often been said that Jeremy Corbyn supporters might use this to purge the party of, you know, MPs that don't get on with him. True or false, do you think?
Well, at the moment, false, because Labour's rules at the moment say that those MPs who are facing their constituency disappearing have a good chance of reapplying. However, should Jeremy Corbyn win, and don't forget the re-election, or if he does get re-elected, is at the end of next week, he might decide to change those rules. The left of the Labour Party might look at it and say, actually, we want to have new people in. And it's at that point, I think, that those who've been most critical of Jeremy Corbyn might start looking over their shoulder.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed for now.
The Boundary Commission plans, designed to be fairer and to save money, if passed by Parliament, will cut 50 parliamentary seats and redraw boundaries of many others to try to even up the numbers of voters in each constituency. Labour could lose half of those MPs, and the party is protesting. But some Labour constituencies are of the view that every cloud is a silver lining, especially if their MP is no fan of Jeremy Corbyn. The minister charged with implementing the reforms to the UK's parliamentary boundaries has called on Jeremy Corbyn to put an end to the compulsory reselection of Labour MPs by matching a Tory pledge that none of their MPs would lose out. Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
MPs will have to jostle for seats when their numbers are cut from 650 to 600 at the next general election under reforms to the UK's parliamentary boundaries. It amounts to the biggest shake-up of Parliament in a generation, with noble aims and a hint of low political cunning thrown in for good measure. The government says it is righting an historic wrong as it finally delivers on one of the aims of the 19th century Chartist movement to create equal-sized constituencies. Labour says the reforms carried over from the last Parliament amount to gerrymandering because they will help the Tories, who say they are disadvantaged by the present boundaries.
This whole accusation of gerrymandering, I just simply don't buy into this premise. It simply highlights the historic injustice that has been there as far back as 1838 when the Chartists called for equal size representation. You know, the Chartists who are heroes to some people on the Labour benches actually set out this principle, and it's a Conservative government that's determined to enact it. I find it odd that the Labour Party wants to highlight the fact that we have seats such as Arfon in Wales, 37,000 electors, versus Manchester Central, 87,000 electors.
When George Osborne and David Cameron dreamt up their reforms in the run-up to the 2010 election, they could never have imagined that they would also hand a gift to the Labour left, a mechanism for the compulsory reselection of MPs. Leading critics of Jeremy Corbyn may find themselves in bitter battles to remain in Parliament because party rules open up a full selection process if an MP has a territorial claim of under 40% on a new constituency.
I think constituents who are not part of the political party would look very poorly upon factions coming in to deselect their member of parliament. That's not how we do politics. MPs go through reselection battles. We've always had that. But to sort of target people in a sort of sectarian way, we don't want that. I think talk of
one Labour MP who shares something in common with Jeremy Corbyn, their nearby constituency boundaries are being radically redrawn, says the Labour leader should do more to discourage his supporters from talking about deselecting MPs.
Well, I think it's not helpful for a political party to be in the state we're in now, let's be honest. And certainly it would be good if he could just make it clear, and I think he has a couple of times said this, that talk of deselection is unhelpful.
The Conservative minister charged with implementing the reforms has called on the Labour leader to be more supportive of his MPs.
The Prime Minister's been very clear to government MPs that no colleague will be left behind. I'd say to Jeremy Corbyn, I'd hope he'd reflect that same principle of leadership in his own party. I hope that momentum will not ensure that there's no colleague left standing on the Labour benches.
In the end, the reforms may never go ahead. Labour, along with every other opposition party at Westminster, will oppose the changes when a parliamentary vote is held towards the end of 2018. It would only take around half a dozen Tory MPs to vote against the reforms, or around a dozen Tory MPs to abstain for them to fall. One member of the government told me he's pencilled in a severe bout of the flu on the day of the vote to ensure he can do his bit to kill off what he describes as David Cameron's teenage toxic legacy. For the moment, MPs who've watched their seats disappear face an agonising wait as they prepare to lobby against the changes, and Labour MPs face tricky conversations with their constituency parties.
Well, we'll be hearing again from Nick in a moment, but Lewis Goodall is our man wading deep into Labour's grassroots. He's been talking to local parties today to try to establish whether the talks of deselection of MPs are real. So what have you been hearing?
Well, as we've been hearing, Kirsty, this review is absolutely devastating for Labour. It means that around 13% of all of the PLP will just be eliminated, disappear from the electoral map overnight. And that equates to about 25 Labour MPs. Now, of those, 17 are MPs who are, shall we say, not exactly friendly towards Jeremy Corbyn. And as you're saying, I've been speaking to their local secretaries, their chairs, their grassroots, and about 12 of those local parties have told me that they think there is absolutely no chance that under these new boundaries their incumbent MPs will be reselected. And these aren't unknown figures. They're people like Tristram Hunt, Alan Johnson, possibly even Owen Smith himself.
And so what are Labour MPs themselves saying?
I think it's fair to say that the feeling isn't entirely rosy. One former Shadow Cabinet Minister told me tonight, well, I can't quite repeat it, but suffice to say it rhymes with "I'm bucked." So pessimistic is he about the possibility of his getting reselected. And another Labour MP told me that he was sure that the Leader's office would be coordinating with Momentum, the pro-Jeremy Corbyn pressure group, to make sure that all of these contests are effectively rigged.
Lewis, thank you very much indeed.
I've been getting